Right, afternoon everybody. I can see we've got a packed house here, so welcome. This is the Insight and Marketing Intelligence stage. I'm Caroline Hayter from the Market Research Society, and we sort of champion all things insight, measurement, data analytics, and so forth, hence this session now. So we've got an exciting session lined up. It's Marketing Week's Brand of the Year is the subject, and we're going to be talking about some of the shortlists there. We've got Russell, who's the editor of Marketing Week, to host that, and it's a panel forum, so they'll have conversations. There's the opportunity, as you'll probably be used to by now, to use Slido to send in questions. That's embedded in the Festival of Marketing app. So do use that. If you see someone who's got a similar question to yours, just sort of vote for their question, because those questions that everybody wants to ask will rise to the top and will have more chance of being asked as they go. So I'm going to hand over to Russell and his panel, and enjoy.
Thank you. No whoop, no holler, no, I'm incredibly needy. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I know you've got lots of choice, and that's the wonderful thing about the festival, so thank you for making this decision to join us this afternoon. You're all right? Okay, moving on. So welcome to this session, brought to you by Marketing Week and YouGov. As already teed up, it's about the brand of the year. We have a lofty ambition for this particular session, though, and that's to look at what determines and drives brand success. And it's not simple pontification. As I say, we have a benchmark. Earlier this month, we presented 5 brands to the world, a shortlist for Brand of the Year. And this wasn't my favourites or the favourites of the Marketing Week editorial team. No, there was some rigour, and the 5 were selected initially from a long list provided by our partner YouGov, and that was according to measures of success determined by YouGov's brand index tool, i.e. what consumers actually think and not us in the metropolitan bubble of Marketing Week actually think. And from that, we determined a short list, and that's the 5 brands that we're going to talk about today. So I'm not doing that alone. We have some of our judges who took part in that process, as well as YouGov. Amelia Brophy, Head of Data Products at YouGov. Welcome, Amelia. We've got Pete Markey, who's the Chief Marketing Officer of TSB. Sonia Sudhakar, who's the Director of Marketing at Guardian News and Media. And Toby Horry, who's the Brand and Content Director of TUI. Welcome all. So we're going to look at each brand, as I said, in detail. So I'm going to start with what was ultimately deemed the winner of Brand of the Year. If you don't know, it was Greggs. Greggs were named Brand of the Year just last week at the Marketing Week Awards. So we're going to discuss what makes Greggs in particular tick firstly. I'm going to start with Amelia, who's going to go over some of the key measures that you saw that determined success for Greggs.
Yeah, thanks, Russell. So a couple of things about how we've partnered with the Masters of Marketing for this award. We have a daily tracker called Brand Index. It measures 16 different things about over 1,500 brands in the UK every day. And while we do very much value the opinion of, I think Russell said, the metropolitan elite of marketing, we thought it was really important that we also have the voice of the customer or the non-customer, just the general public in there when looking at which brands should be Brand of the Year. So the data that we looked at is daily, as I said, so it doesn't just capture the planned activity of brands and the things that they want us to see, but it captures everything that happens with a brand, whether they've planned it or not. It's nationally representative as well, so we're taking in the opinions of everyone within Britain. And the other thing that kind of stands out about the data is it measures a whole heap of different metrics. Some of them are equity metrics like value and quality, but some of them are more timely metrics like buzz and ad awareness. So what we really saw in all of the brands on the shortlist was that they performed well on things around brand equity, but also performed well on some of those short-term metrics, which meant they were really top of mind for consumers. And I think that's where Greggs really stood out. At one point in time last year, 1 in 5 Brits could recall seeing a Greggs ad in the last 2 weeks. And they also really harnessed a trend that I don't think anyone really expected Greggs to harness when they came out with their vegan sausage roll. And we have data that says 4 out of 10 Brits are actively looking to reduce their meat consumption. So it really spoke to that group of people and made Greggs perform in a way that we really didn't expect them to this year.
Thank you. Pete, you have nominated yourself to speak on behalf of Greggs. You're a fine figure.
I have, yeah.
You're a fine figure of man. I mean, vegan sausage rolls aside, Greggs is perhaps a triumph of a brand that sort of knows what it is and who it's for, but has successfully, as we just heard, moved into different demographic pools. So, speaking on behalf of the metropolitan elite, what do you like about Greggs?
So I feel really vindicated because there's a Greggs really near where I work, and as soon as I started working, I went to Greggs for lunch, and everyone mercilessly took the piss out of me, and I knew I was ahead of my time. So I now go there at least once a week, and I come back because I've just been and shopped at the brand of the year 2019, and I'm ahead of the curve. And actually, they do know what they're about. They know their audience really well. There's a particular North of England demographic, although that's spreading well across the country. But they've innovated. And actually, vegan sausage roll is just one aspect. If you go into a Greggs, the customer experience has been enhanced. It's quite pacey in there, the way things are laid out, displayed. The offers are well placed. The food area is well placed, and they've also put in little hubs where if you're in a hurry to grab lunch, you can just go straight to that hub and you don't have to queue with all the people trying to get sausage rolls, donuts and coffee at the same time. So they've thought through experientially what the in-branch sort of program should be as well. They've also, I think, been quite clever and quite edgy with knowing where their brand can go and how to push that brand. So vegan sausage rolls, it's like part of the national psyche. But that was quite mercilessly. Piers Morgan really went for that on Good Morning Britain, and that could have gone one way or the other. But it seems to have been grabbed by the public as this much loved thing. Has anyone here tried one? Who's tried a vegan sausage roll? Keep your hands up if you liked it. Oh well, that's not bad.
Okay,
that's not bad.
100%.
Yeah, I've had one. They're worth trying. Apparently, they've got more calories than a Big Mac, but it's not meat, so it's great. You're in the zeitgeist of the people. You can go home going, I'm at least saving the planet. So. But they've innovated on that. So they've launched clever products that have been a bit edgy, and some of the marketing's been quite clever too. So I think it was last Christmas, instead of putting baby Jesus in the manger, they put a sausage roll in the manger for a Christmas calendar. Now, that's if you're going to go edgy, that's quite on the edges of edgy. But clearly, again, that got picked up as being quite clever, quite smart. And I think one of the biggest things is that stat about people were aware of seeing a Greggs advert, right? So I don't think I've ever seen a Greggs advert, but the way they've launched products and innovated and got in the public's consciousness is in such a smart way. You think you've seen an advert because it's so well talked about. So I think it's a great example of a brand that knows what it's about, knows who it's for, is developing a customer experience around that audience, is launching products that work for that audience, and isn't afraid to push the pure boundaries of where their brand's going in the right direction. So I love it, and I'm going to go there again tomorrow.
I think. Do you work at Greggs? Just a really big Pete fan. We all are.
I love you too, Russell.
Thank you very much. So, next brand on the shortlist that we're going to discuss today is Netflix. Amelia, what did you find about Netflix?
Yeah, so look, I think Netflix is a brand that appears on a lot of these types of lists. But frustratingly, Netflix is a brand that doesn't share much information about itself. So it's very difficult for us to actually judge whether what they're doing is successful. What we saw was really interesting in the consumer data is that we've seen increases in the people who are considering Netflix and increases in the number of customers that Netflix has. So their customer base is growing, and the people who are intending to become customers is growing as well. So they've got a really strong pipeline there. And we think of Netflix as being a younger brand. We think of it as being kind of I guess it's still Web 2.0, though we've probably passed that now. But Netflix has really grown its consideration and its perception of value amongst a 55 plus demographic. And I think that's really important because they're now not just seen as something fad or for the kids, but they're seen as a staple that people have, and they're really appealing across all of those age groups. So that's something we saw that made Netflix stand out as a media brand, and is one of the reasons why they're on the list this year.
Netflix is one of those that one of the great disruptors, often held up as an example to all particularly traditional legacy brands, for want of a better way of putting it. It's definitely a triumph of delivery and a triumph of meeting different and changing expectations, and increasingly, if you're anything like me, a triumph in producing great content as well. Sonia, you put your hand up to talk about Netflix.
Only because Pete took Greg's first.
Without letting light in on the magic, everybody wanted to talk about Greg. But that's tomorrow's conversation plug. There is a session with Greg's tomorrow. Sonia, Netflix.
So I probably watched slightly more Netflix than I ate Greg's sausage rolls, but only just. But I thought Netflix was a really interesting one because probably quite an unpopular view here. I don't think it was a marketing approach that got them this credit. I think it was incredible content, a brilliant product experience, and use of data within the product. So all the things that we do, all the things that we talk about, but not necessarily advertising, not necessarily data-driven marketing, not necessarily all the things that a lot of us kind of talk about or think about at the moment. And I think the really interesting thing that they did, which is a kind of marketing conceit, is they almost bought fan bases, because if you think about Breaking Bad and you think about Black Mirror, decommissioned series which had a cult following, they were always going to get those people to come, and those cult series were cult series for a reason, because kind of once you get into them, if you're a certain type of person, you're into that, they will kind of get you really hooked in. And so I think they have played a blinder in so many ways, but they have just heroed the hero, which is their content. And I don't think I've seen any master brand advertising for Netflix. Has anybody else? I was wondering whether I was just like blind to it or not being targeted. Has anybody here seen anything that talks about Netflix as a master brand? That's quite unusual for a brand that's kind of a new entrant-ish. I used to work at ITV, so by comparison it is a very new entrant. And it hasn't gone out there and established kind of what it's for. It just goes out there with those hero pieces of content and brings in specific audiences. So it uses, sort of to talk to content marketing terms, it uses, builds its content around the target audience it has, and then brings them in and does that repeatedly. And I think the over 50s thing is really interesting, because things like Planet Earth, things like other series, the documentaries on Netflix, if anybody watches those, are incredible. They've brought in a whole new audience. My 72-year-old mum watches approximately 4 hours of Netflix a day, and she's like a teenager to get to come for a dinner. Like, literally, Mum, enough. You can't. No, you're not starting to watch another episode. And so I believe it. I believe that the consideration has moved, and and all of that has changed, and that is partly through. And I know how hard it is to get that market to watch media in a different way, to experience media in a different way. Because at ITV, when we were trying to get people to watch then ITV Player, but now ITV Hub, the over 50s watch a significant amount of telly, but to try and get them to experience that funny on-demand thing was, it was a really hard job. And again, Netflix have done it, but not through saying, dear Granny, this is how you use Netflix on that iPad thing that you got to give them for Christmas and you've never used. They just brought them in through the content. I think that is genius. And I think what they kind of also do is use data and algorithms to make the experience the best possible experience, and not in a creepy way, I don't think, but maybe that's just my profile. But I think that they do that, and then the marketing that uses the data is built off the same tooling, the same algorithm, but it doesn't feel weird because you're used to it in the context of the product. So I think actually the product and the content has led the marketing, and it's not a traditional marketing story, much as
Isn't it, though, an example of, and I can think of many of these insight-driven, experience-led brands, the disruptors that I mentioned, whether or not it be Uber or Netflix or Deliveroo. Are we speaking to a different way of building brands and different way of determining brand success? Because Netflix is nothing if it's not an experience.
Yeah.
and it's nothing if it isn't for the products that it hosts and distributes. So is it just a different, yes, they don't have brand campaigns, yes, they don't pull necessarily the same levers, but is it just a different way of building a brand?
Yeah, I think I just went to the customer experience session upstairs, and that really resonated with this kind of subject, I think, because it is about really adding value to your customers. It's back to first principles of marketing, so identifying a need and serving that need, and but they do it through the experience and the product, not necessarily through the ad or anything for it. And so I think this is the new wave of marketing, which it's not a new wave. People are talking about customer experience all the time, and it is, but it shows that it's important, and you can't just have a shonky product and put a nice ad around it. You have to have the whole kind of end-to-end thing.
I mean, I would draw a line, and I'm not sure if anybody's ever drawn this line between Greggs and Netflix on the basis of what you two have just said, because Pete, you said you didn't recall an ad necessarily, or you've never seen, because that's because Greggs is pulling on all the marketing levers, as well as Netflix pulling on different marketing levers, perhaps those that haven't even been
but also,
available.
Our agencies often talk about the ultimate win for a brand is when you become part of culture, and even I don't think my mum knows what Netflix and chill means, but most people do. But and so the fact that they have started to become part of the vernacular, and that it's a phrase like that is, and Greggs are the same, aren't they? Everybody knows, like you said, they're part of the psyche. I think that's what they've done. They've sort of placed themselves in our lives in a really kind of deep way, that means that everybody's talking about them.
Should have my 8-year-old daughter who both thinks of TV as Netflix. There's no distinction in her mind, and she also loves Greggs. I've never seen somebody so excited when she sees the blue logo on the motorway. So she's coming in to interview Hannah and Roger tomorrow. Anyway, moving back to the brand of the year shortlist. Let's talk about IKEA.
So actually, just kind of building on Netflix, one of the things that all of these brands have in common is they've really shone when it comes to recommendation. And so that's something that stands out when we're talking about this non-traditional marketing is potentially you haven't seen something at the tube station or on TV, potentially someone's told you about it. And IKEA is another brand that really outperforms its competitors in recommendation, but also in buzz. So buzz, we ask consumers if they've talked about a brand either positively or negatively in the last 2 weeks. And IKEA gets talked about positively in the last 2 weeks by a lot of people. And that's something that keeps the brand very current and means that it performs really well. I think also IKEA has always been a brand that has positioned itself around sustainability, everything from the kind of flat packing to the materials it uses, but that really aligns now with its customer concerns as well. And so it's been able to bring parts of its kind of brand to the front, or its production line to the front, and speak to its consumers who have said that sustainability in the purchases that they're making for their home is really important.
Flat pack furniture aside, Toby, what do you like about Greggs?
Well, I mean, clearly I've got to declare an interest in IKEA, and that most of my house is Billy bookcases, etc. So I'm sure it's like most people here. But I think for me, what makes IKEA a fantastic brand is just that real clarity of purpose and why they're there in the world. I mean, I haven't actually. I'm sure they have got a form of words, but if I was to write it down, it'd be something like stylish furniture at affordable prices. And I think having that real clarity of purpose, you can see it pervade everything they do, whether it's the brochures or when you go in store, etc. And so I think just having that clarity of purpose really helps. And I think, I really saw that when I was at Tesco about serving British shoppers a little better every day. It sort of hammered through people, and it's certainly something now I'm at TUI that I'm really keen that we make sure we're really clear, that people know why a brand exists in the world, because I think that's, there's a commonality between all of these brands that is really clear. I think in terms of their advertising in particular, it's interesting, they're not afraid to take some risks. I don't know if you saw they did an ad, a press ad recently for a half price of a cot, and in order to reveal the discount you had to pee on it, like a pregnancy test. So they're clearly not. I'm not sure how many people actually did that. You just worked with water, I hope. I don't know. I didn't do this. Just to be clear.
Did anybody?
And they did a thing early in the year where they recreated all the Simpsons rooms in IKEA furniture. So they're very good at sort of finding those sort of newsworthy ways of driving advertising. I think the one thing I would say is sometimes in the AV, I think they're a bit schizophrenic. So they do some fantastic advertising, but it's not like there's not like a sort of core thread that I can think of that runs particularly through the TV advertising. But like I said, they're very prepared to go above and beyond. And I think the other thing that they're now is going to really help them having that core purpose as they move into the digital age. So clearly they are now coming under the sort of macro pressures of the high street and digital sales, etc. Again, time at Tesco showed that actually serving an online sale is significantly more expensive than serving an offline sale, and yet those are the pressures in the market. Everything is moving more to online. So how they deal with that is going to be quite interesting, and already they've started to deliver these sort of in-town sort of micro shops, so you can sort of browse and see what you might want to buy, and then it gets delivered to you. And they're looking at things like AR and even just really simple things in the experience, like when you go and look at a product, they'll tell you whether it's actually in stock in that store. And I'm sure we've all been in situations where you find something, you go in there and it's not there, and it's the most frustrating thing in the world. So I think, again, going back to some of the points that I made earlier about they've got a really good customer experience, and they're really thinking about all of those points of the customer experience. And that, frankly, is what does build the brand in most cases. It's not advertising, it's the actual experience of the brand. So I think because of that, they've done a fantastic job. Although, having said that, my favourite ad of the year was actually one that they didn't do. Do you see the Mog sofa, which Jacob Rees-Mogg sort of reclining? So yeah, I thought that was very funny.
But there's a halo effect there.
Well, yeah, I mean, it goes back to the point about it's a brand that's in the public psyche, so you can instantly put the word Mog on a sofa, and everyone knows exactly with a couple of belts over the top, and everyone knows exactly what you're talking about. So yeah.
But that point you made that binds together all the brands about having a clear sense of purpose. I mean, purpose is a conversation I'm sure you'll hear being had somewhere else across the battle of marketing, but it seems to me to be generally misappropriated of having been worthwhile or worthy or associating with a bigger cause beyond your brand and your customers. Let's just explore that sense of what having a clear sense of purpose actually should mean.
Yes.
Is it just knowing very well what you do and what you're good at? Because that's Greg's, isn't it?
No, absolutely. I think completely agree that there are some brands in some sectors for whom the more worthy definition of purpose is perfectly appropriate and right. But I don't personally believe that every brand in the world's first and foremost purpose should be that. So I'm not sure if Greg's should necessarily have a worthy purpose that supersedes their ability to deliver delicious baked goods to the masses. Which I think is probably more what their actual purpose is. So no, I think the word purpose does get slightly misappropriated sometimes in these sorts of conversations.
Okay, let's bring it back to the next on our short list, who actually do have a strong sense of self and purpose, but for perhaps different ways. Nationwide, Amelia, what did you find out about them?
So interestingly, we looked at Nationwide and around some of the campaigns that they've done on their Voices campaign. And we've done some research over the last year or so, some that we presented here last year, about brands using social issues within their campaigns. That being different from a brand having a purpose and a brand actually electing to make a campaign about some particular social issue that they're going to align with. So Nationwide did that, and Nationwide are a brand that we think have done it successfully. We saw both their customers and non-customers agreed with the sentiments that Nationwide was expressing, and also that in general they were more likely to agree that it was okay for brands to talk about social issues. So Nationwide had a good fit there in terms of bringing an issue to the front, but the people they were trying to reach being open to having a brand talk about that issue, so it didn't fall flat. The other thing, though, that we see with Nationwide is that they have really high loyalty amongst their customers. So when we compare them to other brands within their sector, we see that they're much more likely to have customers who have a 20-year plus relationship, and that their customers are much more likely to say, if they're in the market for another product, Nationwide would be the first place that they go to. So while they're doing sort of campaigns that push the boundaries a bit in terms of taking on social issues, they're also really delivering in a way that means their customers are keeping on coming back to them.
I think that's really interesting. Despite what I just said, Voices is a really great example of a brand that can play in such a space, because it just plays to their general positioning, a wider point, which is they're not the unscrupulous banks that they're positioning themselves against. Now, Pete, speaking as a CMO of one of those unscrupulous banks, what do you like about Nationwide?
It's easier talking about sausage rolls. No, look, I'm actually, maybe odd thing, a really big fan of Nationwide. And Nationwide are one of those businesses that have got their mojo back. I mean, they're a building society, they're not a bank. And actually, for years, they forgot that. And they did some pretty terrible advertising. And many of the faces in the room are too young to remember this. I am too old to remember this, but they did some ads with Little Britain. So they had Matt Lucas and David Williams, and they were trying to sort of joke around, and it jarred a bit, and they lost their point of difference. They lost what their brand was really about. And since Sarah's come in as CMO, she's taken them right back to why do we exist, and what role do we play in people's lives in society? And they've rediscovered that being a building society, where all your profits and what you earn go back to members, is a powerful thing. And it is the opposite of, I'd argue, much bigger banks in the city who obviously have profits and shareholders, which is quite different to if you're a building society. And they've really found an audience for whom that message, which is a very powerful message, really connects and works, particularly over 50s. And that has been driven through both very clever advertising. So the Voices campaign, I think we forget now because we got quite used to it, but when the ad breaks first started and you had quite noisy ad breaks and suddenly someone would just read poetry, no music, nothing else, just some poetry on the screen, it was quite powerful, quite arresting in terms of what it did, and quite simple messaging. So they've got their mojo back through what they're about, they've got some clear messaging, and they've also innovated both the digital experience. They've invested millions in digital, so the digital experience is better. I've got a savings product with Nationwide. It's a very good experience online and very good to connect your products together. And they've been enhancing the in-branch experience too as well. And if you go to a Nationwide branch, and there's one just down the road from my favourite Greg's, so you can have a vegan sausage roll and then go to Nationwide. They've really connected with communities. If you go in, there are boards that show we're part of this community. Here's the community we serve. So each branch feels local. So it's not a branch of Nationwide as this generic kind of mass of a business, but it's here's the Swindon branch, here's the Bristol branch. So you get a sense of a business that connects with and cares locally for that community too. And that obviously, the clever use of data, digital, that relationship is driving increased multi-product holding and retention, particularly for that audience. So I think at its heart, they've rediscovered, I mean, we're talking a lot about purpose. I think it is powerful if you get it right. If it's not just a slogan you slap on the wall, if it's real, if you can feel it in the business and your customers can connect with it and you line up behind it, it is powerful. And that's exactly what's happened at Nationwide. And the icing on the cake is the Stories campaign.
Thank you very much. Now, last but not least, Cadbury. Amelia, what did you find out about them?
Cadbury, I think a lot of us were a little bit surprised to see Cadbury on the list. But what we've seen in the data from Cadbury is that they're just doing things a little bit better than they needed to, and then their competitors are. So their customer base claims to have more traditional tastes than people who don't say that they're a Cadbury's customer. So that's quite interesting because Cadbury's has taken quite, I wouldn't say an aggressive, but they've done a lot of product innovation at the moment. So they've kind of got a dual strategy there where they've got their core products that are really appealing to those traditionalists, and then they've got their innovative products where they're looking to bring new audiences in. So they're seeing rises in consideration as a result of both of those. And we've also seen that their TV advertising consistently cuts through, with people who are TV viewers being much more likely to have said that they've seen an ad for Cadbury, and also saying that they're much more likely to consider the product than people who aren't seeing TV ads for them. So again, it's not necessarily a brand that's done something revolutionary, but what we've seen in the customer data is that they're just performing better.
And the thing with Cadbury, I think it's a similar issue and challenge that every other in consumer goods faces. You're essentially operating in declining markets, so you have to invest in product innovation, and you have to invest a lot in awareness and indeed salience as well. Now, we're almost in the home stretch, and I did promise that I would get through some of your questions, so true to my word, I'm going to do that. So let's open it up to your questions. We can do this the organic way. If you want to have some personal interaction, just stick your hand up. The room's small enough that we can all hear you, but let's do it the new way. Let's have a look at what question. Well, I'm a Democrat. I'll go with the one that's got the most votes. Blockbuster should have become Netflix and Kodak. Instagram, sorry. How can big business use insight better to not let similar opportunities slip? I suppose this is a question for. Well, I suppose in some degree you're all working in legacy or traditional vertical sectors that are exposed to both disruption and changing expectations. So that's the question essentially. The need to invest and continually invest in insight. How do you do it and why is it important?
Because I'd argue with that it's a good question. It's insight, but also there's a fair degree of bravery. I mean, if you look at Blockbuster, and I only know bits of the case study, and hopefully some of them will remember the days when you used to go to a shop and rent a video or DVD. It feels like the dark ages now, doesn't it?
There's still one left apparently.
There is, yeah, in America. That's fine. It's happy days. But
it's a long way to go to get a video.
Yes, that's right. There are much better options. But the challenge is they sat on the insight. They knew the direction it was going in, and the exec made a strategic decision to invest in real estate and push against where the trend was going. When actually, I think at one point they could have bought, was it Love Film that got bought by Amazon? Do you remember that? I think they were going to buy Love Film.
Yeah.
So actually, the insight is one thing, but you need a very brave and smart exec team who are going to go, actually, we're going to go in a certain direction with that trend of data and not ignore it. I mean, my other favourite case study like this, I am, again, showing my age, is Encyclopedia Britannica. So in the 1980s, people would come to your door and claim that your children could be wiser if they read these encyclopedias that they charge you £500 to buy.
I'm proof that that's not true.
Yeah,
we had the full stop.
They were great doorstops, but they disappeared because digital was revolutionising their business, and they ignored it. And the team that were producing CD-ROMs were at war with the team producing the books, and they destroyed themselves. So there are many businesses and case studies like it. So I think you need really good insight that taps into consumers, where things are going and trends. And then you need the bravery of an exec team to go, why don't we revolutionise our business model, and are we up for that too? Because that's the only thing that would have saved something like Blockbuster, a wholesale change in the business model and approach.
I had exactly the same when I was a baby planner at Abermead. I worked on Yellow Pages, and it was literally that. So the paper bit was at war with the phone bit, was at war with the CD-ROM, then latterly internet bit. And I had to write a brief for some TV that was going to get people to use the book instead of the internet, and it was like sort of trying to push the tide back.
I mean, what's the lesson here though? Because with the benefit of hindsight, we could all say that those particular businesses were doomed from the beginning because the vagaries of passing of time and technological demand and customer expectation clearly meant that the writing was on the wall. But a little less siloed.
I don't know. I think it's like insight can come in a lot of forms, and I think like if you spend too long looking in at your own insight, then that's where the danger is. Whereas if you spend time understanding what the market's doing and what your customers' needs are, and not at what they're actually doing, but what their behaviours are and what their mind state is, then I think that's how you can become more relevant for them. And that's what they did. All these brands have just become more relevant for customers in the current context of their lives. And I think that's where insight is really powerful. And you don't have to have an amazing technology lab, because if you look at how some of these businesses started, they started as small startups. And so with all the resources that are around legacy businesses such as ours, we should absolutely have the ability to do it. It's just about having the mindset to look out of your own patch and stop obsessing about your own kind of business model and looking at what the customer needs.
Disruption is not the sole domain of offline though. For every Blockbuster, there's a Friends Reunited or a MySpace. So things are moving along, and this session's moving along. I've just been told there are 2 minutes left, so let me pick a question that nicely. Actually, I like this one from Nick. Neither Greggs nor Netflix do much advertising, but are both doing well with consumers. There it is. Where does that leave advertising? We did touch upon this earlier on. I mean, and I'm asking it in a leading way, I suppose. Is it about advertising per se, or is it just about being a good strategic marketer and being aware of everything that you can actually do and the power that you have?
I think it is. I think you talked earlier on, Russ, about pulling all the levers, and the CIM still talk about, or did used to talk about, the 4 Ps of marketing, and those will remember that: product, price, place, promotion. I think there's a lot to be said that you need to pull on each lever now as a marketer, and actually just doing great communications. I don't think it was ever the case you could just do great comms, but I think particularly now with these sorts of models, what you're finding is it's as much about experience and content and connecting with consumers, and that's as important, if not more important, than great creative. So know your levers and pull hard on the right ones is more important than ever.
Somebody can get the last word here.
well, I was just going to say on Netflix, I think there's a lot of movement in that market. You'll probably know much better than I do about how a lot of content suppliers are now going to stop supplying their content to Netflix than they were in the past. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if you roll on a year or two's time and some of these, some of the brands in that particular sector which haven't had to use advertising at this point use it. I mean, famously at one point Amazon said, oh, every pound spent on advertising is a pound wasted, and funnily enough, they do quite a lot of advertising now. So I think markets do evolve, and at some point I wouldn't be at all surprised if they started doing more advertising.
Thank you very much. I think if my takeaway, and it's difficult in 35 insight-packed minutes there, is I really like what you said, is having a very clear sense of purpose, who you are and why you are and who you're serving is absolutely key here. Insight, absolutely key. And the other thing I think we've all learned today is that everybody loves Greggs.
Hey.
Thank you very much for attending. Thank you very much for your time.